Every doctor said it was impossible. Permanent nerve damage. No chance of recovery. Accept it and move on. James Nolan had accepted it. For 3 years, he'd accepted it. Until that afternoon. He came home early and saw something that shouldn't have been possible. His son was standing. James stood frozen on the terrace, briefcase still in his hand. Stephen, his boy who hadn't stood in 3 years, was gripping Helen's shoulders, his legs trembling beneath him. Helen, the woman he'd hired to care for Stephen, knelt in the grass by the reflecting pool, her hands barely supporting his calves, and Stephen was standing. James couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It lasted 5 seconds, maybe less. Then Stephen's legs gave out and he collapsed into Helen's arms. Both of them were crying, laughing, holding each other like something sacred had just happened. James had spent $3 million on specialists, Harvard doctors, 12 of them. Every single one said the same thing. Stephen would never walk again. But here, right in front of him, was proof they were wrong. He should have felt joy, relief, gratitude. Instead, something cold gripped his chest. Because if this woman, someone with no medical degree, no credentials, someone he paid $18 an hour, could do what all those experts couldn't, then what did that say about every choice he'd made? Every time he'd told Stephen to accept his limitations, every time he'd chosen his company over being present, his voice came out sharp, colder than he intended. "What exactly are you doing with my son?" Helen turned, her eyes met his, calm, steady. Stephen's joy vanished, his face went pale. "Dad, But James wasn't listening. He was staring at Helen, his mind racing with liability, lawsuits, unauthorized treatment, risk. And in that moment, fear made the decision for him. Before we begin, like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because maybe you need to remember today, hope shows up in the most unexpected places. "Dad, please. She's helping me." Stephen's voice cracked across the terrace. He reached toward Helen, his small hands trembling. James didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on Helen, who stood slowly, grass stains on her knees, water from the pool edge soaking through her clothes. "Mr. Nolan, if you'd just let me explain." "I don't need explanations. I need you to pack your things." The words came out flat, final. Helen's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, something quieter, sadness maybe, or disappointment. Stephen wheeled himself forward, his voice rising. "Dad, you don't understand. I stood. I actually stood. She's been working with me for months and I'm getting stronger and, Stephen, go inside." "No, you can't do this. She's the only one who, inside, now." The boy's face crumpled. Tears spilled down his cheeks, but he didn't move. Just sat there in his wheelchair, staring at his father like he was looking at a stranger. James forced himself to stay firm. This was for Stephen's protection. False hope was worse than no hope. He'd learned that the hard way. "Helen, I'll have your final check ready by 6. Someone will bring your things to the front." Helen nodded once. She didn't argue, didn't plead. Just looked at Stephen, her expression soft. "You did so good today," she said quietly. "Don't forget that." Then she walked past James, her steps steady, and disappeared into the house. Stephen watched her go. When she was out of sight, he turned to his father. "I hate you." The words were small, barely a whisper, but they landed like stones. Stephen spun his wheelchair around and rolled toward the house, his shoulders shaking. James stood alone by the pool, the afternoon sun warm on his face, the sound of water lapping gently against the stone edge. He'd done the right thing. He had to believe that. But dinner that night was silent. Stephen wouldn't look at him, wouldn't speak, just pushed his food around his plate until James finally told him he could go. By midnight, James sat in his study, the house dark around him. He'd called his lawyer earlier, confirmed the termination was clean, no liability, no risk. But he couldn't stop seeing it. Stephen's face when his legs held, the way Helen had barely been touching him, like she knew exactly how much support to give and when to let go. James reached for his laptop, pulled it open. He told himself he just needed to document what Helen had been doing, for legal protection in case she tried to claim wrongful termination. But his hands hesitated over the keyboard. The security system had cameras everywhere, the pool, the terrace, the therapy room James had built 3 years ago, the one filled with expensive equipment that Stephen never used. James pulled up the footage from today, watched the moment he'd walked in on, watched Stephen stand, watched him fall, watched the joy on both their faces. Then he scrolled back. 1 day, 2 days, a week, and he kept watching. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. James sat in the blue glow of his laptop screen, the house silent around him. He'd been watching for an hour, maybe 2. He'd lost track. The footage showed everything. Helen arriving early every morning, a notebook tucked under her arm. Helen on her lunch break, laptop open, searching through medical journals and therapy research. Helen in the pool with Stephen, guiding his legs through exercises while she counted out loud, her voice patient and steady. 1 more, Stephen. You've got this. 1 more. James watched her celebrate when Stephen moved his ankle 3 inches to the left, watched her write it down in that worn notebook, the date and time, the exact measurement, watched her high-five his son like he'd just won a championship. There was no recklessness, no guessing, just weeks and weeks of careful, methodical work. James scrolled further back, found footage from 6 months ago, Stephen barely moving at all, Helen talking to him softly, telling him stories, making him laugh even when the exercises hurt. "Your mom would be so proud of you," she'd said once, her hand resting gently on Stephen's shoulder. "She'd see how hard you're trying." Stephen had cried that day, and Helen had just held him, not saying anything, just being there. James's throat tightened. He'd been so absent, so buried in work and grief, in his own guilt, that he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. Helen hadn't been trying to replace the specialists. She'd been doing what they never did. She'd been present. James closed the laptop, sat back in his chair. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. He should go to bed, try to sleep, deal with this in the morning. But he couldn't. He stood, walked upstairs, past Stephen's room. The door was cracked open. His son was asleep. Finally, his face still streaked with dried tears. James's chest ached. He went to his own room, showered, put on jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed billionaire, just clothes. By 4 a.m., he was in his car. Helen's address was still in the employee files, a small apartment building 40 minutes outside the estate, the kind of neighborhood where people worked 2 jobs and still struggled to make rent. James parked across the street, bought 2 coffees from a corner shop that was just opening, sat in his car, and waited. The sun came up slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. At 6:30, the building door opened. Helen stepped out, a bag over her shoulder, heading toward the bus stop. James's hands gripped the steering wheel. This was it. He could drive away, let her go, hire someone new, someone with credentials and a clean resume, someone who wouldn't make him feel like he'd failed his son. Or he could do the hardest thing he'd done in 3 years. He could admit he was wrong. James opened the car door and stepped into the morning light. Helen saw him immediately, stopped walking. Her expression shifted, guarded, careful. James crossed the street, the 2 coffees in his hands, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. When he reached her, he opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "I was wrong." The words scraped out of James's throat like broken glass. Helen stood on the sidewalk, her bag over her shoulder, the morning sun behind her. She didn't move, just watched him. James held out one of the coffees. His hand was shaking. "I watched the footage, all of it. What you've been doing with Stephen, it's not careless, it's not reckless, it's..." His voice cracked. "It's everything I should have been doing." Helen's eyes stayed on his face, reading him, measuring. "I can't take back what I said yesterday," James continued. I can't undo firing you in front of my son, but I'm asking you, please, come back, full time, whatever terms you need. I'll sign anything. Just don't give up on him because I was too scared to believe. The street was quiet. A bus rumbled past. Somewhere a dog barked. Helen took the coffee, held it between her hands. I'm not doing this for you, Mr. Nolan, she said finally. I'm doing it for Stephen. I know. And if you doubt me again, if you let fear decide for you, I won't come back, not a second time. James nodded. I understand. They drove separately through the waking city, the sun climbing higher, traffic starting to build. When they pulled into the estate, the front door opened before they even parked. Stephen. He must have been waiting by the window all night. The boy wheeled himself down the ramp so fast he nearly tipped forward. When he reached Helen, she dropped to her knees on the gravel. Stephen threw his arms around her neck and held on like she was the only solid thing left in his world. You came back, he whispered. You came back. I'm here, Helen said softly. I'm not going anywhere. James stood by his car, watching his son cling to the woman who'd done what he couldn't. His throat burned. The household staff had gathered by the door. Cook, gardener, housekeeper, all of them watching. Some smiled. Some wiped their eyes. They'd seen what James had missed. That afternoon, James did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He canceled his meetings, all of them. He sat by the pool and watched Helen work with Stephen. Really watched. Saw the way she counted each movement, encouraged every effort, celebrated the smallest progress. Does it hurt? James asked Stephen during a break. Stephen looked surprised his father was even there. A little, but it's a good hurt. Like something's waking up. James's chest tightened. Later, as the sun started to set, Stephen looked up at his father. His voice was small, scared. Dad, you're not going to send her away again, are you? James knelt beside the wheelchair. No, I promise. You promised Mom you'd always be here too. And then you weren't. The words hit like a fist. James opened his mouth, closed it. He had no defense. I know, he said finally. But I'm here now, and I'm learning. Helen's teaching me too. Stephen studied his father's face, then nodded, just a little. That night, James made a call. Dr. Patricia Chen, a specialist he'd worked with years ago on a company case, someone who could provide medical oversight, protect what Helen was building. When he told Helen the next morning, she stiffened. I'm not trying to replace you, James said quickly. I'm trying to protect you. If this works, when this works, I want it documented by someone the medical world respects. Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right. But neither of them saw the black sedan that pulled up to the estate gates that afternoon, or the man inside taking photos. Richard Strauss sat in his downtown office, reviewing the images his investigator had sent. Helen Grant with the boy, James Nolan watching them, all of it looking very, cozy. Richard leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. Time to see what this woman's really made of, he murmured. He picked up his phone and made a call. 3 weeks passed. James started coming home earlier, not just on time, early. He'd sit by the pool during Stephen's sessions, asking questions, learning the names of exercises he'd never cared about before. Helen was patient with him, showed him how to spot Stephen during balance work, taught him which stretches helped and which ones pushed too hard. Support here, she'd say, guiding James's hands to Stephen's lower back. Not lifting, just steadying. Let him do the work. James watched his hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, tremble as they touched his son's back. Such a simple thing, but he'd forgotten how. Stephen was getting stronger. 10 seconds of standing became 15, then 20. His legs didn't shake as much. His smile came easier. One afternoon, Stephen looked up at his father during a break. You're here a lot now. James set down his phone. Is that okay? Yeah. Stephen's voice was quiet. I'm not used to it. The words stung, but they were true. I'm sorry, James said. For all the time I wasn't. Stephen looked down at his hands. Mom used to say you were busy saving the world. That's why you couldn't be home. James's throat closed. Your mom was kinder than I deserved. Do you miss her? Every day. Me too. Stephen's eyes filled. Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like. Is that bad? James pulled his son close. No, that's not bad. That's just what time does. It doesn't mean you loved her less. They sat like that for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, the pool water lapping softly against the stone. Helen watched from across the terrace, giving them space. But when James looked up and met her eyes, something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or gratitude. That evening, Dr. Chen came for her weekly visit. She reviewed Helen's notes, watched video documentation of Stephen's progress, ran her own assessments. This is remarkable, she said, looking between Helen and James. Truly remarkable. I'll be presenting your methods at a conference next month, Helen, with your permission. Helen hesitated. I don't know if that's... The medical community needs to see this, Dr. Chen insisted. What you're accomplishing here could help so many families. James noticed Helen's discomfort but didn't understand it. Not yet. After Dr. Chen left, Helen was quieter than usual, distant. What's wrong? James asked. Helen shook her head. Nothing, just tired. But that night, as she walked to her car, she noticed something. A man, sitting in a sedan across the street, camera in his lap. When he saw her looking, he started the engine and drove away. Helen stood in the driveway, her keys in her hand, her heart beating faster. She told herself she was being paranoid. But the next morning, when she arrived at the estate, there were 3 missed calls on her phone, all from the state medical board. Helen stared at her phone. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, 1 email with a subject line that made her stomach drop. Formal inquiry, unlicensed medical practice. She sat in her car in the estate driveway, hands shaking, reading the email twice, then 3 times. Someone had filed a complaint, anonymous, claiming she was practicing physical therapy without a license, claiming she was endangering a child. The medical board wanted to interview her, wanted documentation, wanted to know exactly what she'd been doing with Stephen Nolan. Helen closed her eyes and breathed. She'd been careful, so careful. Everything she did was based on research, adapted from legitimate therapeutic methods. Dr. Chen had reviewed it all, said it was sound. But sound didn't matter if someone wanted to destroy her. She got out of the car, walked toward the house, tried to keep her face calm. Stephen was waiting by the door, grinning. Helen, Dad said we could do pool work today, can we? Please. She smiled, forced herself to smile. Of course. But James saw it immediately. He'd gotten good at reading her these past few weeks, the small shifts in her expression, the way her shoulders tensed when something was wrong. Stephen, go get changed, James said. We'll meet you out back. When the boy wheeled away, James turned to Helen. What happened? Nothing. I'm fine. Helen, she met his eyes, and something in his face, the concern, the steadiness, broke through her walls. The medical board called. Someone filed a complaint against me. James went very still. What kind of complaint? Practicing without a license, endangering a child. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. They want to interview me, review everything I've been doing with Stephen. James's jaw tightened. Who would... He stopped, thought, how would anyone even know what you're doing here? Helen remembered the man with the camera, the sedan that sped away when she looked. I don't know, she said quietly, but someone's been watching. James pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyers right now. Mr. Nolan, James, and this isn't negotiable. Someone's targeting you because of my son. That makes it my problem. Helen wanted to argue, but the relief she felt was stronger than her pride. That afternoon, while Stephen practiced in the pool, James made calls. Lawyer after lawyer. his voice sharp, commanding, protective in a way Helen had never heard. Stephen didn't notice the tension. He was too focused on his progress, too happy that both his father and Helen were there. "Watch this," he called out, gripping the pool edge. He pulled himself up, legs steadying beneath him, and stood for 30 full seconds. Helen and James both clapped, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Later, after Stephen went inside to rest, James's lawyer called back. James stepped away to take it. Helen watched his face change as he listened, watched his expression go from concern to something darker. When he hung up, he stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. "What is it?" Helen asked. James turned to her. "My lawyer did some digging. The complaint came from someone with connections to Nolan Industries." Helen's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't about you." His phone buzzed. A text message. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. "It's about me." The text message was simple. 3 words. "We need to talk." It was from Richard Strauss, James's business partner of 15 years. James stared at the screen, his mind racing. Richard. Of course it was Richard. "What does it say?" Helen asked. James showed her. Helen's face went pale. "Why would your business partner file a complaint against me?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." That evening, after Stephen went to bed, James drove to Richard's house. A sprawling estate not unlike his own, all white stone and manicured lawns. Richard answered the door himself, smiled like they were old friends meeting for drinks. "James, come in." They sat in Richard's study. Leather chairs, expensive scotch, the kind of room where deals were made and lives were changed. "You filed a complaint against Helen Grant," James said. No preamble, no pleasantries. Richard's smile didn't falter. "I was concerned. For you. For Stephen. Concerned." "James, listen to yourself. You've been spending all your time at home, missing board meetings, canceling investor calls. The merger vote is in 6 weeks, and you're nowhere to be found." "My son is walking again." "Because of an unlicensed caregiver using God knows what methods." Richard leaned forward. "What happens when he gets hurt? When she pushes too far and something breaks? You'll be ruined. The company will be ruined." "Dr. Chen has reviewed everything. Helen's methods are sound." "Dr. Chen isn't on the board. The board is asking questions, James, about your priorities, about your judgment." James set down his glass. "You're threatening me." "I'm protecting you and the company. Step back from this distraction. Put Stephen in a proper facility with licensed professionals and focus on what matters." "My son matters." "Your son will be fine. But if you lose this company, if you lose everything you and I built, what kind of father does that make you?" James stood. The kind who finally shows up. He walked out without looking back. But as he drove home, Richard's words circled in his mind. The merger. The board. The company he'd spent 20 years building. Could he really risk it all? When he got home, Helen was still awake, sitting in the kitchen with tea. "What did he say?" she asked. James told her. All of it. Helen was quiet for a long time. Then she set down her cup. "Maybe he's right." James looked at her. "What?" "Maybe I should step back just until the merger is done. You can hire someone licensed, someone who—" "No. Mr. Nolan, James, and no, I'm not letting him win." Helen's eyes filled. "This isn't about winning. This is about Stephen and you. If you lose your company because of me, then I lose it. But I don't lose my son. Not again." The words hung between them. Helen looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Before either of them could speak, James's phone buzzed. An email from an unknown sender. He opened it, read it, and his blood went cold. It was a photograph. Helen and Stephen by the pool. Intimate, close. The angle made it look wrong, like something it wasn't. Below the photo, a single line of text. Imagine what the media could do with this. Helen stared at the photo on James's phone, her hand on Stephen's shoulder, the boy looking up at her with complete trust. The angle twisted it into something ugly, something wrong. "He's going to destroy me," she whispered. James's grip tightened on the phone. "He's trying to scare us. It's working." The kitchen felt too small, too quiet. Helen stood, moved to the window, stared out at the dark estate grounds. "I should leave," she said, "before this gets worse, before he hurts Stephen with this." "Helen, look at that photo, Mr. Nolan. Look at what he's turning this into. If that gets out, if people see it and think—" Her voice cracked. "I can't do that to Stephen. I won't." James stood, crossed the kitchen, stood beside her at the window. "3 weeks ago, I fired you because I was afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid of hope, afraid of change, afraid of admitting I'd failed my son." He turned to look at her. "I'm not making that mistake again. This is different. This is your company, your reputation, everything you've built. I built a company. You're rebuilding my son. There's no comparison." Helen's eyes filled. "You don't understand what men like Richard can do. I've seen it before. People like me, we're easy targets. No money, no lawyers, no protection. He'll make me look like—" "You're not alone in this." The words settled between them like a promise. Helen wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. Belief got you hurt. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Richard's threat, about the merger, about Stephen's face when he stood for 30 seconds today. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. "Found something. Need to show you. Tomorrow morning." James sat up, read it again. Whatever his security team had found, it was enough to wait until morning. Enough to document carefully. Hope stirred in his chest, small, fragile, but there. Down the hall, Stephen lay awake too. He'd heard voices earlier, his father and Helen in the kitchen. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew the tone. Something was wrong. Stephen reached for his phone on the nightstand, pulled up the family calendar his father kept, saw the entry for next week. Board merger meeting, final vote. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. His father was in trouble, and it had something to do with Helen. Stephen looked at his legs under the blanket, thought about how far he'd come, how much stronger he felt. Maybe there was something he could do. In the guest house, Helen sat on the edge of her bed, the threatening photo still burned into her mind. She'd been here before. Different city, different family, different accusations, but the same ending. People like her didn't win against people like Richard Strauss. She pulled out her phone, started typing a resignation letter to James. "Dear Mr. Nolan." Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she thought of Stephen's face today, the pure joy when he stood for 30 seconds. She deleted the letter. Whatever was coming, she'd face it. For him. Across town, in his office lit only by a desk lamp, Richard Strauss reviewed his plan. The photo was just the beginning. He had more, so much more. Anonymous tips to tabloid bloggers, contact information for concerned board members, a timeline for maximum damage. By the time he was done, James Nolan would be begging to step down as CEO. And that unlicensed caregiver? She'd never work again. Richard smiled and reached for his phone. Time to make the next move. James's security chief arrived at dawn. He spread documents across the dining room table, photos, bank records, phone logs. "Richard Strauss hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago," he said. "The same day Dr. Chen first visited. He's been tracking Helen's movements, Stephen's therapy sessions, your schedule." James stared at the evidence. "Why?" "The merger. If it goes through as planned, you remain CEO. But there's a clause. If the board votes no confidence in your leadership, Richard takes over. He's been building a case that you're distracted. Unfit." Helen stood in the doorway, listening. Her hands were shaking. "There's more," the security chief continued. He pulled out a recording device. "Richard's assistant came forward yesterday, said she couldn't stay silent anymore. She recorded this conversation." He pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, cold, calculating. James is so busy playing house with that woman and his crippled son, he can't see I'm positioning myself to take everything. The board already has doubts. One more push, and he's done. James's face went white. The recording continued. Get me everything on Helen Grant, every job she's been fired from, every family that let her go. I need her to look dangerous, unqualified, like someone who manipulates vulnerable families. Helen's breath caught. And if that doesn't work, the assistant's voice asked, then we make sure the photo I sent him ends up everywhere. Let the media decide what it means. By the time he fights back, the damage will be done. The recording stopped. Silence filled the room. James looked at Helen, saw the pain in her eyes, the fear. He was never going to stop, she whispered, no matter what I did. No, James said. He wasn't. He stood. His expression had changed. No more fear, no more doubt. The board meeting is in 3 days, he said. Richard's going to present his case, try to force me out. What are you going to do? Helen asked. James looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at Helen, then toward the stairs where Stephen was still sleeping. I'm going to show them the truth. That afternoon, James made calls, not to lawyers this time, to board members, trusted ones, people who'd known him for years. He told them everything, the investigation, the threats, Richard's plan. I'm asking you to trust me, he said. One more time. Come to the meeting, hear what I have to say, and then decide. That evening, Stephen wheeled into his father's study. Dad, James looked up from his laptop. I want to come to your meeting, Stephen said. Stephen, it's not... I know what's happening. I heard you and Helen talking. Mr. Strauss is trying to hurt you because of me, because of her. James started to argue, but Stephen's face stopped him. I'm not a baby, Dad, and I'm not helpless. Not anymore. Stephen's voice was stronger than James had heard in years. Helen helped me stand. You helped me believe I could. Now let me help you. James stared at his son, saw the determination there, the courage. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. 2 days later, James received one final message from Richard. See you at the board meeting. Hope you've made your peace with losing everything. James deleted it. He'd already lost everything once. The day his wife died and his son stopped believing in himself, he wasn't losing anything ever again. The morning of the board meeting, James stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. Helen appeared in the doorway. Ready? She asked. James turned, looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his life and changed everything. Thank you, he said, for not giving up on him, on us. Helen's eyes filled. Thank you for coming back. Downstairs, Stephen waited in his wheelchair, dressed in his best clothes. The three of them drove to Nolan Industries headquarters together. As they walked into the building, James felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The boardroom doors opened, and Richard Strauss was already waiting. The boardroom was silent. 23 board members, attorneys, executives, all watching as Richard stood at the head of the table, his presentation ready. Thank you all for coming, Richard began, his voice smooth. I know this is uncomfortable, but leadership demands difficult conversations. He pulled up a slide. Photos of James leaving work early, calendar entries showing missed meetings. James Nolan has been my partner for 15 years, but in recent months his focus has shifted. Personal matters have consumed his attention during the most critical merger in our company's history. James sat quietly, Helen beside him, Stephen's wheelchair at the end of the table. Richard continued. I have evidence of household staff overstepping boundaries, unlicensed medical treatment, a pattern of judgment that puts both his family and this company at risk. He pulled up the photo, Helen and Stephen by the pool. The angle still twisted, still ugly. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. I'm not questioning James's love for his son, Richard said. I'm questioning whether personal crisis should dictate corporate leadership. He sat down, looking satisfied. James stood slowly. Thank you, Richard, for showing everyone exactly who you are. He nodded to his attorney, who began distributing folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find bank records showing Richard hired a private investigator to stalk my son's caregiver, phone logs proving he filed a false complaint with the medical board, and recordings, provided by his own assistant, of Richard planning to manufacture evidence against me. The room went still. James played the recording. Richard's voice filled the boardroom, cold, calculating, admitting everything. When it finished, the silence was deafening. Richard's face had gone pale. "This is... You can't." "I can. And I am." James's voice was steel. "You didn't just come after me, Richard. You came after my son. You tried to destroy a woman whose only crime was helping a child walk again." He turned to the board. Helen Grant accomplished what 12 specialists couldn't, not through recklessness, through patience, research, belief. Dr. Patricia Chen has documented everything. It's all in your folders. James paused, then gestured to Stephen. "But you don't have to take my word for it." Stephen gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. His hands were shaking, but his face was set with determination. Helen moved to his side, but Stephen shook his head. "I want to try alone." The room held its breath. Stephen pushed himself up. His legs trembled, but they held. And then, step by step, he walked. 12 deliberate steps across the boardroom floor to where his father stood. Someone gasped. Another board member wiped her eyes. When Stephen reached James, his father's arms went around him, holding him steady. "Helen didn't just help me walk," Stephen said, his young voice clear in the silent room. "She helped my dad remember how to be my dad." James's eyes closed. His son's words landed in a place he didn't know was still broken. The board voted immediately. Richard was removed, not just from merger leadership, from the company entirely. He left without a word, his face twisted with fury. 3 months later, the Helen Grant Foundation opened its doors, a building downtown filled with light and hope, free therapy for families who'd been told impossible. At the ribbon cutting, Stephen walked across the stage, no assistance, no help, and handed his father the scissors. The crowd erupted in applause. But the moment James would remember forever came that evening. They sat by the reflecting pool, the 3 of them, Stephen's legs dangling in the water, strong enough now to kick gently. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Stephen asked. "What?" James said. "Mom. I think she would have liked Helen." Helen's breath caught. James looked at her, saw the tears in her eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "She would have." Stephen smiled, leaned his head against his father's shoulder, and in that moment, sitting by the water where everything changed, James understood something he'd missed for so long. Grace doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up quiet, steady, in the form of a woman who believed when no one else would. Sometimes it shows up in a son who forgives. Sometimes it shows up in a second chance you don't deserve but receive anyway. Helen reached over, squeezed James's hand once. He squeezed back. And in the fading light, they sat together, not as employer and employee, not as broken people trying to fix each other, but as family, the kind that doesn't come from blood, the kind that comes from showing up, from believing, from refusing to let fear win, the kind worth fighting for.